There's some things about record labels and how record labels work that I'll share with you that will blow your mind on how they do things. And so that'll explain why a lot of artists are starting to go independent. What's up, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the Country Cut podcast. Another week has come for hopefully what you all enjoy listening to and watching as much as I enjoy making. And that's another edition of the Country Cut. So I'm so excited to have you join me this week. We got a lot of great stuff coming your way. I'm really hoping that like I said, that you all love it. And so, I know last week we touched on artist news, some industry updates. We touched on some artist tour announcements, where they are on tour, where they're going, that kind of thing. We'll still kind of touch on that a little bit, but I want to focus it more on something a little different this week. It still relates to country music. Don't worry, I didn't stray from that. It still relates to country music, but this episode is going to really tie into what this podcast is all about, what this podcast was created for, and the goal of this podcast. And so I really hope that it means a lot to you. I know to me this episode is very special because I'm going to talk about two of the biggest and most important things in my life, or I should say one of the most important thing in my life, and one of my favorite things in this life. And so I hope it touches your heart as much as it will mine, and as much as it did mine preparing for it. And I can't wait to hear your feedback. The support's been great so far with this podcast, and I can't thank each one of you enough for that. So we're gonna dive right into it. We're gonna go for it here. So the first name that I made for this episode, I bounced around a lot of names for this episode, couldn't really find one that stuck. I was trying to get it fancy and do some really fancy, crazy stuff, but I couldn't really find anything that really stuck well. So I just went to it and kept it basic. So this episode is titled Faith and Country Music. How do they tie together? So before I get into it, I'm going to start every episode from now on. I'm going to start every episode with something new. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you all two things. I'm going to give you a song of the week. So I'm going to give you a different song to listen to this week that maybe you hadn't ever heard before. And then I'm going to give you an artist or two that I think if you hadn't ever heard before or ever listened to their music, that you absolutely should give them a listen. So we're going to do that, and then I'll dive into, as always, the weekly Bible verse, and then we'll get into the good stuff. So let's see. Hang tight with me, and we'll get it rolling here. So the song of the week that I chose, and this artist, he just released an album, and I've seen this artist on tour. This artist is incredible. I love listening to this artist. I love this artist's voice. I love the message behind his songs. In concert, he was great. You know, he really got popular on TikTok, blew up on TikTok, and just off of one song. And now he's going on tour with guys like Morgan Wallen. He's been on tour with Bailey Zimmerman before, and Hudson Westbrook. So he's going out on tour like crazy. He's got a couple of music videos out, and he's really starting to blow up. In my opinion, his album he just released, there's not very many skips at all on that album. At all. I love every song that's on that album. So, but the one song that's probably my favorite, or one of my favorites, that really touches my heart the most is Time is the name of the song, and the artist who wrote that song is Blake Whiten. Now, a lot of people know Blake Whiten. Blake Whiten's got a very raspy voice. Blake Whiten's a young guy, just getting really big into the industry, so he's starting to try to figure things out, you know, how things work, all that. But Blake Whiten is a name that I hope that if you all don't know about, that you will very quickly discover. And learned to love. I love his album. I listen to it pretty regularly. Tom is one of my favorites on there. Boots by the Wrong Bed is another great one. Ghost House is another great one. Of course, you got Break Me, which is the one that made him really popular. And he's a great artist. I've learned to really like him a lot. So the song of the week this week is called Time by Blake Whiten. And then I'm going to hit you with two artists of the week. Two artists that I really think that you all should give a listen to if you never have before. The first one, he's fairly decently popular, I guess. He's really starting to get pretty popular. And the other one, a lot of people probably have never heard of before. So the first one for the artist of the week is George Burge. Now, George Burge, I've liked George Burge for a while now. I think George Burge is a heck of a guy. I think he's got great music. I love some of the music that he puts out. He most recently put out a song with Priscilla Block that's called You Ain't, and that's a banger of a song. My favorite one by George Burge is Cowboy Songs. I listen to that one pretty regularly. But, of course, he's got It Won't Be Long, which is a really popular one. Whatever That Was is another really popular one that he has. So that's artist number one that I think that if you hadn't ever listened to, you should check out. The second one is going to be a deep pull. A lot of people probably don't know this artist, never heard him. He only plays really small venues. He doesn't release a ton of music. He's got a couple EPs out and that kind of thing. He releases singles every so often, but he doesn't have a complete album out yet. He's got, like I said, he's got a couple APs, but he's still kind of on the up and coming, I guess is the right word to use. But his name's Will Mosley. It's Will, W-I-L-L, Mosley, M-O-S-S-L-E-Y is his name. Will Mosley's a lot like Blake Whiten in as far as the raspy voice goes. He's another artist. He's been in it a little while longer, but he's one of the coolest artists that I've ever heard. He's got a lot of great songs. Mechanic is a great song. He's got another one that's really good that's called Good Book Bad. That tells a great story. Mechanic tells a great story. He most recently released a new song called Right by the River. That's a good one. I just listened to it whenever it released about a week or so ago, and that's a good one. Will Mosley's a great artist. He plays a lot of small venues, so he doesn't really go to a bunch of massive venues, but he's one of those diamonds in the rough, almost like a hidden gem kind of thing that I really like a lot. And I hope that you all will trust my judgment and give him a listen and learn to like him as well. Like I said, he doesn't release a bunch of music extremely often, but he also doesn't release any music that's very very highly produced from the standpoint of a bunch of different beats and instruments and all that. A lot of the times when you hear his music, you're going to hear a guitar and some drums, and that's essentially it. And that's what makes him so great. That's what makes him really like him a lot. So he's another one you should check out. George Burge and Will Mosley are my artists of the week this week. Like I said, I'm going to do that every week. So those are some I absolutely think that you should check out and would love. So now for the good stuff. As always, we'll do a Bible verse for the week before we get into the meat of things. So this week's Bible verse that I chose comes from Psalm. It's Psalm 33, verse 3. It says, "Sing to him a new song, play skillfully and shout for joy." So it's a short verse. It's a simple verse. And music is a huge part of everyone's lives, and we know that music plays a big factor in a lot of people's lives. And I love this verse because this verse is short, it's simple, but it's basically saying, sing. God loves it when we sing. God loves music. God's a big music fan, and so sing, but sing songs of praise to Him. And so that's what this episode is going to be about. It's going to be about country music and artists that are open about their faith, that are releasing songs that are very, very faith-based, faith-related, and that kind of thing. So, yeah, music, like I said, it's a gift from God, and it really can be an act of worship and gratitude if it's used in the right ways. And so that's what I hope that you all will grasp from this. So, like I said, there's a couple artists that do that now. Some of the ones that come to my mind most recently. One of my favorite podcasts to watch is called Unashamed Podcast, and it's by the Robertsons. So Jace Robertson's on it, Al Robertson's on it, and it's a really good podcast that they release every week. Well, this week one of the guests they had on the podcast was Ann Wilson. And Ann Wilson, she's a Christian artist, but she has that country music feel to her. So she releases a lot of like Southern gospel country albums, and a lot of them are really, really good. A lot of her songs. She's a great artist, and she has brought in a lot of other country artists, mainstream country artists, to sing a lot of songs with her. But you even got artists like Drew Parker who've been open about their faith in their music. Drew Baldridge is another one. Connor Smith is another one. Connor Smith is an artist that actually got out of his record deal, and now he's an independent artist, which in my opinion is very smart. Very smart. Connor Smith has built enough of a following and enough of a listenership to be able to go out of his record deal to be able to still afford to have a life because of the following he has. And there's some things about record labels and how record labels work that I'll share with you that will blow your mind on how they do things. And so that'll explain why a lot of artists are starting to go independent. And I'll share that with you momentarily. I'll get into why artists go independent and how record labels really, really do things. So he's one. Dylan Marlowe is another one. Dylan Marlowe, as I told you last week, is one of my favorite country artists. He's been extremely open about his faith. He and his wife went through a lot of infertility struggles, and he's been open about that. And he and Connor Smith are actually really good friends, and they've released a country Christian song together. It's called Country in the Clouds, and it's a really good song as well. Cole Swindell has released some faith-based songs also. He's got one with Ann Wilson, and then he's got one that he released. It's called Make Heaven Crowded, and it's a great one. I really like that song a lot. Cole Swindell, I've met Cole Swindell. Cole Swindell is super cool dude. What's nice about him is, he won't walk up to you and act like you don't want to talk. Or I say walk up to you. You won't walk up to him and talk to him and he won't act like you're a waste of time. He's genuinely interested in speaking to you. He's genuinely interested in the conversation that you're having. And Cole Swindell's a great guy. If you ever get the chance to go see him or do a meet and greet or whatever else with him, I absolutely recommend doing it. You won't be disappointed by no means. Cole is a great dude. I love Cole Swindell. I've spoken to him. I only spoke to him one time, but we spoke for a pretty good while, and it was a very good conversation. We kind of picked at each other back and forth a little bit. Where he went to college, where I went to college. They're both pretty big rivals, and so we joked at each other with that back and forth, and so yeah, really, really cool guy. Of course, Lainey Wilson has as well come out and said her faith is pretty big in her life as well. Most recently, everyone knows her, Ella Langley. Ella Langley's really been more open about it as of late, talking about how depression got the best of her, and a lot of times that anxiety and all that got the best of her, and a lot of times that she looked to God to get out of that, as everyone should, and he really helped her through it, and now she's very open about her faith. Morgan Wallen, surprisingly, he's another one, and a lot of people don't think that, but Morgan Wallen is another one that's been open about it. Morgan Wallen, he did a show a couple weeks ago and was wearing a brace or a wrap around his leg. He actually had a Bible verse around his leg. And then what's cool is he has his own radio station now, and he does a Sunday 7. So he does his dad was a former pastor, and his dad comes on, and his dad actually preaches in prisons. So he does prison ministry, and his dad actually comes on and does a 7-minute Sundays is what it's called, and he just does a little devotional for 7 minutes. And Morgan's been very open about, you know, his foundation growing up in church, singing in church, his dad being a pastor, how much that means to him. Now, Morgan lives a very quiet life, so you don't hear him talk about it a ton. You don't really hear him talk about anything a ton, really. I mean, he's very off the grid from almost everything, essentially. He pops up for tour to sing at concerts for a weekend, and then he's gone, and nobody hears from him for, you know, another weekend or however long it may be. So, but he's another one as well that's really big and open about their faith. Thomas Rhett, Luke Bryan, Blake Shelton, Cody Johnson, they all have been. Cody Johnson had said that he and his family would go to church every Sunday, and as he started to get popular and really start to, you know, people would start to know who he was, he noticed that when he was going to church, people would care more about coming to see him than they would actually what was going on at church. And he couldn't even take his family to church anymore because, you know, it got to a point to where he was being bombarded, and he was there, you know, for the sole reason of church, and people bombarded him with it. And so he said he just couldn't do it. And so now he watches church, he says, on his tour bus and at home with his family and that kind of thing. So I thought that was really great. By Your Grace by Cody Johnson is a great song. It's one of his ones that gets overlooked, but By Your Grace is, I love that song. And then, of course, he's got another one, When a Cowboy Prays, with Brandon Lake. That's a really good one too. That's one of his more recent faith-based ones that he's released. So yeah. So definitely check out those artists. A lot of them I said you probably know. There might be a few in there mixed in that you don't know, but look them up. You know, study them. Look at you know, their viewpoints on faith and that kind of thing. It'll really blow your mind. A lot of these artists, they're not as open about it, I guess, as what you know we would hope they would be, but they have spoke on it several times. And you know, you only see how they are in the public eye. You don't see how they are behind closed doors. So who knows? But so anyways, like I said, this episode is really about, you know, how do country music and faith tie together. So I've got 6 points here that I'm going to give you, or 6 examples of how country music and faith will tie together. So the first one is through redemption is the first one that I wrote down. So one of country music's biggest stories and themes is people who make mistakes but ultimately can change and do change. You know, you have songs about forgiveness, about asking for forgiveness. You have songs about turning their lives around, second chances, overcoming addiction, that kind of thing. And they all align with grace and forgiveness because we know that that if we call upon Jesus to forgive us our sins, that Jesus will forgive us of our sins, and you know, he will, if we repent of our sins, Jesus will help us get through that. And so you see a lot of country artists that will write songs a lot of times about redemption, whether it may be, you know, something throughout their life happens, you know, that they realize that they've fallen down a pit, and so they make a song about it, about how, you know, they've, you know, turned their life around. And however it may be, you hear songs about addiction and all that, that are kind of like underlying messages, and then you listen more to them about how they've overcome that addiction, and you know that they've found their way out of it through that redemption that we have in Jesus. And so that was the first point that I wanted to touch on that really stuck out to me the most. The second one is that I wrote down is gratitude. Gratitude. So many artists acknowledge, you know, blessings a lot in their songs, and the blessings that they have in life, and they even do it too on social media. They'll do it as well on social media with you know, pictures that they post or whatever else it may be. You know, they show it with family, their home, their small town life, all that kind of thing, nature, working hard. You see it a lot. I think of Working Hard. I think of the Brooks and Dunn song "Hard Working Man." That's a great song too. You think of another one by Brooks and Dunn, "Red Dirt Road." That's another really good one that talks a lot about gratitude. And then of course, family is a big one. Like I said, it goes back to that whole song of the week that I chose with Time by Blake Whiten. One of the things he talks about is the importance of time and how time doesn't last forever. And so he spends that time that he can with his grandfather because he knows his grandfather isn't going to be, here on earth for much longer. And so he makes sure that he's taking time to spend that with family and showing the gratitude for his family. And of course, I'm from a small town, so I love small town songs, and you can find small town songs everywhere. There's some great ones. I love the Jason Aldean song, "Small Town Small." I love that one. Dylan Scott's got one called "Nothing to Do Town." That's really good, that I like a lot. And there's other ones too. I didn't write them down, but I'm just telling you the ones off the dome that I like a lot. I mean, every artist, it seems like, in the industry nowadays has a song that talks about living in a small town, and every small town in America that artists love and they take pride in being a part of. So yeah, that one was another one that I feel like artists really tie their faith into. The attitude of thankfulness often reflects a faith perspective, even when God isn't mentioned directly. Is very accurate. That's very accurate. All these artists will release songs and they'll write songs that talk about thankfulness, and they are, I don't want to say a precursor, but they're essentially a way of saying, hey, I'm thankful for this, but I ultimately know where that thankfulness comes from and where these blessings and opportunities come from. Who's the one that created these blessings and these opportunities. And it talks about how if you humble yourself before God, Jesus will humble himself before God. If you humble yourself before Christ, he'll humble himself before God. So a lot of these artists too, that they become very humble, and they you hear them all the time at award shows and everything else that say, I couldn't do this without, and they start listing off their record label, their tour managers, their art, their band, the people who help them write the songs. So they're showing that humility, and and that's what we're called to do as believers. That's what God calls us to do, is to remain humble in all things. And when you have such a successful lifestyle, a lot of times it gets to the point to where you almost get a sense of pride, essentially. And so these artists showing that humility, showing that thankfulness for ultimately God putting them on this earth to glorify him, and doing it through music. You see that a lot nowadays, and that's another underlying message that a lot of people, I think, miss, is that, hey, these artists, they know where their ultimate talent comes from, and they're not ashamed to admit it. And I think that's really great. I love that quality. So the third one that I wrote down here, the third point that I want to make in how faith and country music tie together, is it provides hope through hard times. Country music doesn't shy away at all from pain. You can go back all the way back to when country music first started. And you go all the way back to artists like Earl Scruggs, or you even go to artists that were after him, artists like Loretta Lynn, or artists like George Jones, or artists like Conway Twitty, or artists like Johnny Cash, or the list goes on, and it carries on generation after generation after generation after generation of it. And that's what country music a lot was founded upon. A lot of times is heartbreak, and so yeah, there's hope through the hard times. Loss, divorce, family struggles, military deployment, illness. you look everywhere in country music, and now, especially modern mainstream country, a lot of the music that's released is about heartbreak. It's about, I don't want to say sadness, but it's about toxicity, or it's about whatever else through relationships. And so it even stems to be true and to be accurate in today's country music scene. Some of the songs that I really think of that really touch well on this is Toby Keith has a song called American Soldier. That's a really big one. Then you have Justin Moore that has one, the ones that didn't make it back home, which actually talks about and honors the veterans that ended up losing their lives serving. Well, I shouldn't say veterans. The people in the military actually lose their lives serving our country. That creates hard times, and then there's a lot of artists that touch on that. There's a lot. Brantley Gilbert is another one that does, and then like I said, you even get family struggles. One artist that really touched on it well several years ago when he was on the up and coming. I said that earlier. But whenever he was really starting to make a name for himself, Tyler Childers actually released a song called Hard Times, which talks about it, and he's even got a song called Coal, just Coal, that he touches on, how hard life can be, for a coal miner, and how difficult life can get at times. And so he turned that into music, and he turned it into a song, and he said that song helps him get through those hard times. And that was back when Tyler Childers had a beard and he had long hair. Now he's baby faced and got short hair, but that was way back. I've known Tyler Childers' music for a long time, but that was way back, a long time ago. But he even touches on it as well. Tyler Childers is another one that grew up singing in church. He grew up singing in Kentucky at the church where, he's from Kentucky. So grew up singing in church. So he's very big in his faith as well. He proclaims to be big in his faith. One could argue that based on just, how he is at his concerts and such, and what some of his lyrics say in some of his songs. But that's besides the point. Anyways, he touches on that as well. So he's one of the first artists, like I said, that comes to mind when I think of that. So the attitude of thankfulness often reflects a faith perspective, even when God isn't mentioned directly. So, like I said, you talk about songs like the ones that didn't make it back home. It talks about, just God and how, he's blessed us as Americans with the safety and protection, and created the people that were willing to go and fight for our freedoms, to where we have a safe country that we can live in and we can abide in. And so you see it everywhere. There's, like I said, there's underlying messages behind a lot of these songs. You just have to really make sure you're really listening to the lyrics, but you see it everywhere. We'll go back to Morgan Wallen. He's said before, we'll go to his current I'm the Problem album, his song Genesis. He's got a song called Genesis and another one called Revelation, and that ties into faith as well, beginning and end. And then his song I Ain't Coming Back, he says, I ain't Jesus, but the only thing is I ain't coming back. He talks about basically saying how he knows that Jesus is coming back one day, but he's not Jesus, and he's not coming back. And he throws it in his songs. He said that he tries to throw that message into his songs in some way, whether it's lyrically or with his music, with the titles of his songs, however it may be. So even him, he'll tie in as well, like I said, and so yeah, you see it underlying, and you have to really make sure that you're listening to more than just the beat of songs. I'm very guilty about listening to just the beat of music and not actually listening to the lyrics. But if you listen to the lyrics, a lot of times you'll hear some really, really good stuff from artists it's almost like that light bulb moment where it's like, ah, I didn't realize that after listening to it the first time, but now that makes sense, or now I understand what he or she is saying in that song. And it's really cool. It's done to be, I think it's done to really be not necessarily inspirational, but really make you think. At least it does for me, from the standpoint that I look at some of these songs. So moving on, we got to move on here. I could talk about that for a long time. So the fourth one that I wrote down was church culture. So like I said, a lot of these artists, they grew up in church. That's how they got their start, was in church. You know, one of the first stages that they ever sang on was a church stage. And so that's where they go back to their roots, essentially, and they sing at church growing up. And you know, they never leave that. You know, the Bible says, train up a child in the way they should go, and when they're older, they won't depart from it. And you see that with artists now. Drew Parker, I mentioned him earlier. Drew Parker's got only one song out right now that's faith-based, that's called Blame Jesus. Drew Parker actually sang at my church when I was younger. So Drew Parker's grown up in church, and Drew Parker now is continuing to write music for artists, but he's also got his own song out now called Blame Jesus. Now you can go listen to all his other stuff, but he's also got one called Blame Jesus. That's a really good song that he's done a great job at self-promoting. Chase Rice is another one that's done the same. So you're seeing, you know, church, like I said, church was a lot of times for a lot of these artists their first stage. So whether it's singing in choirs, worship bands, whatever. But, you know, gospel music heavily influences early artists, even like Johnny Cash. One of my favorite Johnny Cash songs that I've ever heard is God's Gonna Cut You Down. That's a great song, but it's very truthful. You can run on for a long time, but sooner or later, God's going to cut you down. You know, you can run from God for as long as you try, as long as you would like to, but eventually, He's going to find, you're going to have an encounter with God, and eventually, He's going to cut you down. And that's one of my favorite songs. Ain't No Grave Gonna Hold My Body Down is another one. If you're a big UFC fan, Justin Gaethje walked out to that song at his last fight against Ilia Topuria, and it's another faith-based gospel song that he has. By the way, Bailey Zimmerman, on his Religiously album, the very first album he ever released, he remade God's Gonna Cut You Down, and gives me chills every time I blare that song in my truck. It's a great song. His version is great. Johnny Cash's, of course, is Johnny Cash, so it's a good one. But his version is awesome. If you've never heard it, please go listen to it. But you see artists like Johnny Cash. You even see artists like Dolly Parton as well. Dolly Parton, if you've ever been to Dollywood, which if you're from the South, you more than likely have been to Dollywood. It's almost like Dollywood is like the Myrtle Beach for vacation, the Myrtle Beach of like amusement parks, I guess. So Dollywood's great, but it's all throughout Dollywood as well. But Dolly Parton also will not shy away at all from her faith and how she grew up in church and sang in church with her siblings, and she's another artist as well. And then Alan Jackson is incredible. He's one of my all-time favorite artists, I would say. And he's even got a whole Southern gospel album that is awesome, where he does nothing but just sing choir songs, basically, Southern gospel choirs, hymns. And it's great. Alan Jackson, you're starting to see that more with him. He's really become very open in where he finds his identity, where we all should find our identity. which is in, Jesus. And Randy Travis, you can't forget about Randy Travis. Randy Travis is actually from my home state, and so that if you don't know that, I guess if you looked it up, you would know where I was from. So, but anyways, Randy Travis is another one who was very open about his faith. He's got a lot of great songs that talk about his faith and talk about Jesus and talk about how Jesus is the foundation of his life. And Randy Travis is, one of the most decorated, one of the most famous, popular artists, country music artists of all time. Vince Gill is another one. I'll touch on him more later. So yeah, I mean, you're seeing it all over the place, and it's awesome. It's incredible. From a person who loves Jesus, more than life itself, and loves country music. It's awesome to see. It's very inspiring, and I know that the goal of it all is to be able to hopefully reach another generation and spread the gospel of Christ, which is ultimately why we're put on this earth, which is another reason why this podcast was created, because I wanted to be able to tie the two in together. So, because I think there's a lot of it that people miss. Of course, every song tells a story. Every single song tells a story. Well, let me take that back. Not every song tells a story. Some songs talk about a bunch of nothing, whether it's country music, rap, pop, whatever it may be. Some songs talk about a bunch of nothing, but there is storytelling in a lot of songs. Both country music and the Bible, they both use stories to communicate truth. The truth is, it hurts a lot of times. It really does. But the truth is it is what it is. I mean, it's raw and it's powerful, and that's the case in music and in the Bible. Country often tells stories about everyday people facing real struggles, and because they see parts of their own lives in that struggle. And so, listeners connect with that well because they see parts of their own lives in that struggle. That's why so many artists will release sort of those life struggles, because when you can relate to what an artist has to say, you'll go, that person's just like me. That person is not perfect like they appear to be. That person struggles with a lot of the same things I do. Or that person is weak in these areas like I am. Or this person really needs guidance in these areas like I do. So it's inspirational because it gets to a point to where it really hits you in the heartstrings. And then you're like, ooh, I'm glad I'm not the only one that struggles with that. Oh, I'm glad I'm not the only one that struggles doing this or not doing this, or, whatever it may be. I'm glad that it's not just me, that I have someone else that I know in my life that also struggles with the same things. And that's ultimately what a lot of country artists will try to do, is they'll try to release music that they know is going to hold that meaning to a lot of people, because music is a great way to be able to reach the hearts of a lot of souls, and music can be deceiving, and music can be junky and trashy if you're not careful with it. And I'm guilty of it as well, especially when I'm in the gym. A lot of times I like to work out. When I'm in the gym, I like to listen to a lot of things, pump me up, fire me up, and especially if I know it's going to be a hard day in the gym, and you get lost in the beat, and you get lost in that you don't even pay attention to the words, or you pay attention to the words but you almost turn a blind eye to them, and so you miss out on a lot of good stuff, a lot of bad stuff, and that's how country artists really try to hang their hat, is they try to hit it onto the industry, onto the scene with something that tugs at the heartstrings, which a lot of times ends up being heartbreak. A lot of times ends up being lifelong struggles. There's a song, Bottles and Bibles, once again by Tyler Childers, that talks about that as well, how there's that struggle there. And then even Jason Aldean's got a song, Church Pew or Barstool, that mentions the same things, that where he talks about his struggle with the two. And so Yeah, and I think everyone can relate to songs like that. It's in some sort of way. I think that we get so caught up and distracted in things that we enjoy doing, or things that feel good, or things that make you happy, almost, that we know that God is there, and we know that we should acknowledge that he's there. We know that we should, really try to build a relationship with him every single day, whether it's in prayer, going to church, reading your Bible, listening to podcasts, reading faith-based books, whatever it may be. And we don't, a lot of times we get distracted by things of this world, and those things of this world pull us apart and away from him, even whenever we know that they're bad for us and that we shouldn't be partaking in them, and that really we should rely on, rather than heartbreak, going to a fifth of Jack, or going to a bar, or going wherever. We should rely on Jesus, and we should rely on leaning on him to get us through those hard times, not going through to try to go find a drink to numb the pain, or go find a guy or a girl to sleep with, essentially, or look for validation for, to be able to get past the heartbreak and get past the hurt and get past all that. And that's what a lot of artists, like I said, will do. They'll write songs like that will relate to people, in hopes that they can stick, and it can be sticky, and they can grow from it. They can get that fame, that popularity, and rise up the rankings. And there's real life struggles that you can relate to them with. But at the same time, there's also songs where it's like, hey, look, you're promoting something that's not going to fulfill you, essentially. And that's when you kind of have to look at it and say, hey, okay, I understand this person's pouring their heart out, but at what point do you say, there's got to be better ways of doing this. There's got to be better ways of falling in that trap, falling in that feeling of, hey, I'm gonna go and down a handle, or down a fifth. There's better ways in doing that, and people still fall in that trap, and it becomes almost like a bottomless pit, essentially. I mean, like I touched on it last week, Justin Moore had said that his drinking got so bad that when he's out on the road, and even all that it ruined his stuff with his family. It ruined stuff with his band. And so I don't know, I've talked about that a lot, and that's a different story for a different time, different episode for a different time, maybe. We'll see. I don't know. And then we got to move on. So the last one I wrote down was Explicit Faith. So some artists, they'll just come out and they'll just straight up record a Christian song out of nowhere that will tie into their their music, but then it also, they'll release it, and then in the middle of whatever it may be, and so their mainstream hits, they might release a faith-based song, a Christian song, in the middle of working on their hits. Randall King, he teased one playing on the guitar sitting on his porch. That was a faith-based one. So you see it a lot, and you're seeing it more often and it's really inspiring. A couple of songs, of course, everyone's heard these songs. They're pretty popular songs that mention it. Alan Jackson, Where Were You? Of course, Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning? That's a good one. Randy Travis, Three Wooden Crosses. A lot of people think that's his most popular song, one of his best songs. I would agree it's one of his best songs. I don't think it's one of his more popular. Well, it is one of his more popular songs, but I think that there's other songs too as well that are very popular. Look, Heart, No Hands is a really good one that I think that a lot of people miss out on. That's really good. So, but that's one. Carrie Underwood. A lot of people know Carrie Underwood. Something in the Water. Something in the Water it'll give you chills. It's really inspiring. It's a touching song. It'll move you. Yeah, that's a great one. That song gives me chills, especially towards the end when she's really getting into it, yeah, that's one. And then Vince Gill, like I said, "Go Us High on That Mountain." Vince Gill, "Go Us High on That Mountain" is played. It seems like at every funeral ever. It seems like everyone that I've ever been to, where I've seen like the order of how the funeral is going to go, it's almost like every funeral almost sings that song. At least here in the South, they do. So there's a lot. There's a lot there. There's a lot of songs that you might not think are, but are very big in faith related. And I love it because I think that there's a massive, now you're starting to see a pretty massive shift in faith and Christianity coming into country music. You're starting to see that a lot. Like I said, one of the biggest pioneers of that you're seeing is Brandon Lake. Another big one is Ann Wilson. Ann Wilson, she went on tour with Morgan Wallen. Morgan Wallen asked her to go on tour, and so she's here going on tour singing her Christian gospel music and, leading people to the Lord through that music. And so I love it. You're starting to see that country music is absolutely booming. I mean, it's been booming. It was booming, it's been booming since, the 90s, arguably. It's just getting more and more and more and more and more and more and more popular. You're seeing Christian artists get in it. You're seeing rappers get in it with some features. And so, but I love the fact of, hey, everyone now is finally getting back to the whole when country music first started, and they sing songs about heartbreak, but they also sing a lot of songs about faith and religion and Jesus and Christianity, and artists now are starting to do that more, and I love it. It brings a smile to my face. I love listening to it. I love hearing it. I love it when, Chase Matthew used to go up on stage and tell people, hey, look, I'm not here because of anything that I did. I'm here because of God, and I wouldn't be here without God, and I wouldn't be here without Jesus and blessing me with this talent and this opportunity to get to sing to you all and make music and perform music to you all. And so, it's really cool. He does that right in the middle of his set. And there was an artist, I'm trying to think who it was. There was an artist that prayed. Oh, Tucker Wetmore. Tucker Wetmore prayed before he even started a set. He came out on stage, did his opening song, and then he ended up praying. I can't remember if there was someone who got hurt or what during one of his songs, but he stopped it completely and just prayed. He made everybody that was wearing a hat take their hat off and then sat there and prayed, and ended up touching millions. And he's another one that won't shy away at all from his faith. He's mentioned it a couple of times on some podcasts he's been featured on. So it's great what's happening in country music from the faith standpoint, and because those are two of the things in my life that I love. I wanted to bring my wealth of knowledge to you all and shine some light on that as well. And like I said, this is really what this podcast is all about. And so my hope in this is that you'll start finding some new artists to listen to, whether ones that I mentioned or you just look it up online. You can find them everywhere. You can find all kind of artists that are that way. But more importantly, the ultimate goal, and while we're all put here on earth, is to be able to spread the gospel. And my hope is that for those of you who never heard it, you'll listen to some of these songs and you'll listen to the words that I'm saying, and you'll hear the gospel, and it'll click with you, and you'll realize that Jesus can change your life. If you surrender your life to Christ, He can change your life, and He will bless your life in more ways than you could ever imagine. I could speak on that for hours. So yeah, that's kind of the basis of this show. I wanted to make sure that you all heard that and get that across to you, that hey, it's not just about drinking, getting drunk, partying, having a good time, doing all kinds of stuff, burning the town down. There's also more than just that, and I don't want you all to miss that. I can't continue to live on this earth without sharing that with you all. And I wanted you to know that. So before I let you go, I mentioned to you all that there's a reason why a lot of artists go independent whenever they've got established careers, and I told you that I would tell you why, so I'm going to go ahead and tell you why, and then you do with it what you will, I guess. So I promise you all that I'll give you a lot of behind the scenes stuff of the industry, a lot of things people don't know. But so typically how it works when an artist signs a record deal is an artist will sign a record deal and it'll be for 5 years, whatever it may be, for X amount of millions of dollars. And so how it works is the record label will essentially give them those millions of dollars, and then what they do from that moment on is they say, okay, you have to release 3 albums in 5 years, or you have to go on tour 2 times in 5 years, or whatever it may be. And then, so the artists have to do this because they've signed the contract to agree with it. Well, then what happens is everything that artist brings in, you know, money-wise, income-wise, whether it's royalties or ticket sales at concerts or album sales or radio plays or whatever, which is royalties, whatever it may be, the record label in their contract has said, okay, we're going to take 60% of that. We're going to take 70% of that until we recoup what we've invested in you. And then once we recoup what we've invested in you, then at that point, you know, things change. Well, what happens is a lot of artists, they sign these record deals because it becomes life-changing for them. So these record deals, these record label companies, they've got, they've got so much power. You know, they've got, they can put them on radio, they can put them on tour, they can do so many great things for these artists that, help them get to where they are today. But what you see is a lot of artists then will say, there's also a lot of restrictions here. Like, for example, there's an artist at a brewery that is near my hometown, and that artist will come into that brewery every so often because he's from the area, and we'll sit there, and I've asked the owner, hey, why do you not have that artist play? Why do you not have that artist play? And the owners told me we have to go through the record label, and if he does just a pop-up show and the record label finds out, the record label will have his tail. So the record label, essentially, I don't want to say you're signing your life away when you sign a record deal, but it's almost like, hey, now you're basically under their control. So they're going to control where you go, what you do. I shouldn't say where you go, what you do, but they're going to control everything from the standpoint of musically. So they're going to control, where you play, they're going to do all this stuff. But then they're also, on the flip side, going to provide you with everything you need. So they're going to provide you the studio that you need to record music. They'll provide you the people, the artists or the writers to help you write songs. They'll provide you with all the equipment and stuff that's needed for touring. They'll provide. So on the flip side, the record labels do a tremendous job. But what happens is these artists, once they eventually sign these record deals and they start making a name for themselves, they realize, hey, I don't really like how this is done. I feel like I've provided enough for things to be a little different here. And so what a lot of times they'll do is they'll ask to get out of their deal. Now, what goes on during that, I'm not sure. I have no idea what goes on in those negotiation talks. I don't know if, they have to pay back the money that, they still, I don't know. I'm not sure. I've personally never been told that. But then once they become independent, then you'll see them, they can release what they want, they can release when they want it, they can make songs about whatever they want, they can produce it how they want, they can, essentially, they're basically, their own employee, basically. So you're seeing, that's why you see artists that never signed record deals or artists that were in record deals that got out of them. Connor Smith being one. Connor Smith has put on Instagram several times he's put on Instagram why he got out of his record deal. Another one, Chase Rice. Chase Rice got out of his record deal, and he's loved it because he can create it. He can write his own music about whatever he wants. He can produce it however he wants. He can do all kind. Now, like I said, on the flip side, when you go independent, you got to be careful, because when you go independent, it's harder to get opportunities to be on the radio. It's harder to get opportunities to get these big stadium tour shows or these big like amphitheater shows. So that's why you got to make sure you're, working your way up to that. And a lot of times for some artists, the way to do that, and the easiest way to do that, is by signing a record deal. So you'll have artists, once their record deal's up, they'll say, I'm not re-signing, I'm going to go independent, and they'll go indie. They'll go independent, and so they won't sign up. They won't go on for another 5 years. But typically, when you have artists that do that, they'll sign 3-year contract for 5 years, and then they have to do everything that the contract stipulates. So, but then you get artists that have been in it long enough, like Jason Aldean or whoever it may be, and essentially they have, I don't want to say free reign, but they can almost say, hey, I want this, and this, and they're all but guaranteed to get it. And so you have artists that will stick with it, and then they open their own management company, they open their own record label company, whatever it may be. And they go from there. So management companies, like I said, record, whatever it may be, and then they kind of have free reign. So it's almost like it's not a two-edged sword per se, but it's almost like it's a make a pick, essentially. Do you want to sign the record label with a record label to know for sure that they're going to get you to where you need to be, where you want to be, but you're also going to have a lot of different like speculations and stuff not speculation, you're also going to have a lot of rules and such you're going to have to follow, and a lot of like NDAs or whatever it may be that you're going to have to obey? Or do you want to try to earn your stripes on the independent side of things, and do you want to be an indie artist, and do you want to self-promote, or do you want to do all that rather than having a promoter, or rather than having all the assets and resources you would need for success? So it becomes a decision to where that's a personal decision you have to make. So and you'll see a lot of artists, like I said, this as they grow in the industry. They get a pretty big, pretty successful discography that'll go independent, and they'll say, look, I've done the record label stuff, and I want to go a different route. So I don't know, the choice becomes theirs. So who knows I don't know. Like I said, maybe hopefully that's a pretty good little snippet of information that I can leave you with, to where you say, hey, he's keeping true on what he said he was going to do. So I told you guys that I would leave you with some behind the curtain stuff about podcast or about country music, how country music works, and the stuff that you don't recognize. And so my hope is that leaves you with some cool information that maybe you had never thought of, or you were curious how it worked, but you never knew, or you never found out, or you never asked the right questions or met the right people. So I don't know. We'll see. So that's going to do it for this edition of the Country Cut podcast. As always, I'm so thankful for each one of you who watched this. Thank you for the kind words. Thank you for the not so kind words. I get some not so nice ones every so often. So thank you for the love, the support, the encouragement, the motivation. I love this. I enjoy doing it. I enjoy providing you all with some pretty cool information every week. And we're just going to continue to keep making this better and better. As always, please like, share, comment on it. Send it to one person that you know, that you love, maybe that you hate, whatever it may be. Subscribe and follow along with the journey. We're going to continue to grow. I'm going to continue to get better. I'm going to continue to put out content the best way that I know how, to really try to reach an audience that's passionate about country music and that's passionate about how things work that a lot of people don't know about. So thank you so much, like I said, for tuning in this week. I hope you loved it. Let me know in the comments what you thought, and yeah, next week's gonna be even better. I've got a lot of great stuff dialed up for this episode, and I can't wait for you all to watch it. So until next time, this has been the Country Cut Podcast. Thanks so much, and I look forward to seeing you next time. What's up, everyone? Thanks so much for watching this week's episode of the Country Cut Podcast. I hope you loved it. Thank you for your support. Hit the subscribe button down below and follow along with me on this journey so you don't miss an episode. Your support really helps this thing grow. It really helps me get to where I've envisioned this podcast can get. So thanks again for watching. Click that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. And yeah, I hope you loved it, and I can't wait to see you next week.